Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Spectre here, 5x5 network here for the evening. Little fireside chat. Good to have you aboard. Nice, quiet evening here in the middle part of the country. Figure it'd be a good night to have a little fire here. A few days out from the Christmas holiday. Yeah, we're going to say Merry Christmas here. By the way, Merry Christmas to all of you folks out there. If you're joining on Twitch, good to have you. YouTube, DLive, Periscope, a couple of you over there. Good to have you aboard. Tonight, we're going to cover a handful of articles behind the scenes. We'll start off with some good news, some of the goings-on in the tech space. Before I do, I guess, perhaps by a show of hands, those of you guys that are filing in here before we get started, how many of you guys were able to join here yesterday for the Great Conjunction? Did you guys get an opportunity to step outside yesterday and see the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn as close as it's going to be? Put a 1 in chat if you were able to see that from your particular location, if you're located here in these United States, or even if you're outside the U.S. If not, obviously, here in the next couple weeks, you still have an opportunity to see it over the horizon. It just won't be as close as it was on the 21st for the winter solstice. Yeah, still too cloudy. Yeah. Still cloudy. Yeah, you still got an opportunity, like I said. Next 2 weeks, I think, is probably going to be your best shot. After that, I think they stated yesterday on the broadcast and that we were picking up from. I think after that, it's going to get too close to the sun and too low on the horizon to be able to see. So, in any case, if you get the opportunity, if you get a clear night here over the course of the next couple weeks, you'll still be able to see it. Again, it just won't be as close as it was, or perhaps as bright as it was, I guess, as it was yesterday. I think you can probably see it with, just a handy-dandy set of binoculars. If you got a giant telescope, I'm sure it'd probably do a lot better. Yesterday we were able to see the rings on Saturn fairly clearly. It's pretty spectacular, really. And of course, that was the first time, and depending on which outlet you go by, 400 years or 800 years, I think they stated yesterday that 400 years, it might have been too close to the sun at that point as well and wasn't is easily seen, but nonetheless, pretty neat. Yep. Kidding not, I thought they were gonna block the view. Yeah. Well, and it's funny you bring that up, Go Dog Go, because again, yesterday on the broadcast, I talked a little bit about what happened back in 2017 with what everybody purported to be the Revelation 12:1-2 sign. And there was a lot of hubbub and that on the YouTube channels and that, many of which I followed at the time. Some interesting things were happening in the skies, and of course, just like we have Google Maps and everything else, well, apparently there's a Google Sky or Google Earth or whatever, Google Stars, or whatever the heck it's called. You can use Google to take a look at the celestials and things of that nature. And what we found out back then was that certain areas of the celestials were blocked out. Just a big black box, and nobody could figure out what the heck was going on at the time. Again, this was back like late 2016, maybe early to mid part of 2017, leading up to September 20th, 21st time frame, when all of that transpired. And lo and behold, I don't remember how we arrived at this, but sure enough, Google had blocked out a portion, and it looked very much like devil eyes, two red stars placed at the lower portion of the constellation, which was very, very interesting. Yeah, very cool. All right. Well, like I said, here this evening, got a few things to bring to your attention, a couple things to make you think just a little bit. But first, I'll start with some good news. Hey, guess what? If you're over on Gab, yesterday, Mr. Torba finally launched his alternative to YouTube, Gab TV. And if you recall, dating back before the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, Gab used to have live TV, all that good stuff, before they got deplatformed and everything else. And it's taken this long for them to stand another platform backup, aside from everything else that they're doing over there. So this comes by way of Reclaim the Net, free speech video. This is Gab, that is known as an alternative and free speech social network, has decided to make a foray into video sharing. CEO Andrew Torba says the goal of the new platform is to represent new media that belongs to their independent creators and users, with free speech as the center. The decision to launch Gab TV comes amid what is referred to as the tyranny of big tech, but also of legacy corporate media, whose censorship is aimed at promoting those behind them and suppressing all other views. One of the developments that has exacerbated, but also laid bare the long-term simmering censorship behind powerful and influential platforms like YouTube, has been the U.S. election, and the announcement mentions a recent decision to delete content, making the claim that widespread fraud took place during that vote. And we know that it has, of course. Accusing established media and big tech of acting in unacceptable and un-American ways, including allegations that Google, the YouTube owner, has engineers linked with China's Communist Party. Gab TV aims to be an alternative to existing media and one that promotes American values of freedom. Shocker. The new platform wants provide top video and performance quality, which means that users will be able to watch content in a resolution up to 1080p HD, supported by devices such as phones, computers, and TV sets. Gab TV will also offer audio-only versions to accommodate low data plans, but also features such as picture-in-picture that enables multitasking on various devices. The platform is geared toward independence, while the business behind it is to sell our valuable video hosting and distribution service to creators, while rejecting the competition's model of data mining and tracking. Users will be able to view, share, and embed videos on Gab TV without a Gab account, while those with it will also be able to vote and comment. Gab Pro account holders can distribute their content on Gab or on their own sites. The bad part of that is, I would say at this point, I don't know at what point Mr. Torbo would plan on doing streaming again, or if that is still in works. I'd love to get his thoughts on that. But probably come first of the year, I'll probably have to up the ante here, get myself a pro account, and get over there as well. For those that don't know, I've been doing a lot of streaming on the little-known site known as Tiger Network. I'll go ahead and drop the equivalent of what Linktree is with all the various links in that. You guys can check that out. Just click on the link, it'll take you over to UGEtube, which is one place where I have all of my archives for all shows across all channels that I've been on, as well as where I stream to for the hot topics and that are apparently too hot for YouTube in any case. And in the meantime, we'll have to see what happens with Gab here come first of the year, so look for that as well. Now, that being said, mic is too loud. Ooh, alright. Let me see if I can back that down slightly. See if that's a little bit better. Alright. Yeah, I noticed that this morning. For some reason when I broadcast this morning too, it sounded like I was coming through hot, but I don't know, every time you go over to a lot of these sites, they have the audio and the volume pegged, so it might just be a matter of adjusting your volume down a little bit on your side as well. Either way, we'll get her sorted out here. I'll make a little adjustment behind the scenes. There we go. But yes, to that point. So here's the scenario, right? As things become decentralized, and you've heard me talk about this over the years on various channels. It is good. Yes, we need to decentralize as much as possible. Yes, it's convenient. Yes, it's comforting to be able to go to one spot for all these things, whether it be the Twitters, the Facebooks, the YouTubes, and the like. However, as things become decentralized and more platforms get stood up by various patriots around the country, one thing that I see that's going to be needed, and probably fairly soon, is alternatives to be able to, one, stream out to multiple platforms. So for those of us that do streaming services, net, and streaming out to multiple platforms, just like we're doing right now, yes, there are tools out there. However, I think one of the things that's probably missing out of this is that a lot of these are established platforms, or corporate platforms, if you know what I mean. That being said, as these platforms get stood up, a lot of them are going to require what are called custom RTMPs, the stream keys net, to be able to stream to various sites. So I think we're probably going to need to have a platform where you can stream into that and it will disperse to various sites with custom RTMPs as well. And in conjunction with that, if you look at what Gab TV is standing up right now, it is right now just an upload service, right? A lot of us upload to various different places. Some of us after the original purge and that here prior to the election off of YouTube. Many shuffled over to BitChute. Some shuffled over to other sites as well as Rumble and everything else. But those of us that create are probably going to need to have a tool that will allow you to disperse and upload to various sites. And I'm not sure that there's a tool out there yet that is capable of doing that. So we got a lot of smart folks out there, and especially in times like now where obviously a lot of people are sitting on the unemployed side. I'm sure there's some IT folks out there who are fairly gifted in that sense, could probably stand up a service fairly quickly and make that work. So I'm encouraged by the things that are going on behind the scenes, but at the same time it may be semi-painful, at least for the short term, until we get some other services to help bridge that gap. Alright, well, enough about that here for the moment. I do want to get into a couple articles. Continuing on the series that we started last Fireside out of the Blogmire. If you remember right, the other night we covered an article called 2020, the year we lost the plot. And it was part one of a 5-part series. And tonight I'm going to bring forth the next 2 parts. Although I did see just before broadcast part 4 has come out, but I think I'll save that one for a later Fireside chat, perhaps after the holiday here. But we'll continue on with that, and I got a couple others out of the Mises Institute as well as Natural News, and it looks like Alt Market, Brandon Smith over there. I've referenced a number of his articles over the last years as well. All pieces to help you help you think a little bit about especially where we're at right now. So the first article tonight, again out of the Blogmire, continuing that series, is 2020, the year we let ourselves be infantilicized and dehumanized. So obviously this is pertaining to the COVID stuff. Says this is the second of 5 articles I am publishing over the next couple of weeks, looking at various aspects of our new COVIDian state in 2020. These pieces are also due to be published on the Conservative Women website from the 27th through the 31st of December. It doesn't say it in here, but Zero Hedges also picked them up. It says, I recently wrote a satirical speech by our Prime Minister, in which I imagined him coming up with all sorts of absurd rules for the Christmas season. It was really hard. Not because I was unable to come up with hundreds of such rules, were I minded to do so, but because the whole point of satire is to raise the absurdities up a step or two in order to highlight the ridiculousness of what is happening. But how do you do this when the real-life absurdities have already been turned up to 11 on the amplifier? Turn it up to 11, folks. I kid you not when I tell you that my original list included a rule against playing certain board games over Christmas, which I rejected, only to see a few days later Sage coming out and advising against the playing of board games. We have now had nearly 9 months of being treated like utter imbeciles. A once great country, with a once free people, has been reduced to the level of being governed by pathetic, childish slogans, and for some reason we have allowed ourselves to be infantilicized. I am utterly baffled as to how people can have sat through some of these slogans being introduced without responding with howls of laughter. And one of the such slogans that they reference here is called "Stay alert, control the virus, save lives." Think of that for a second. What exactly does that mean? Stay alert, control the virus, save lives. What on earth is this actually supposed to mean? Stay alert? For what? Are we supposed to be on our guard for a virus that is approximately 120 nanometers, or around 1,000th the width of a human hair? Are we to carry an electron microscope around us with us wherever we go, just in case? One of my favorite signs is an electronic one I sometimes see on my occasional drives into the office. On one day it says, "Stay alert, control the virus." On another it says, "Stay alert, watch out for cyclists." It should be noted that cyclists are considerably bigger than 120 nanometers, and even often wearing the kind of high-vis jackets that coronaviruses refuse to wear. Control the virus? Say what? You mean they actually think we're stupid enough to think they're clever enough to devise schemes that can actually control those little invisible 120 nanometer virus particles that are in the air and on surfaces? Apparently so. Save lives? I am yet to hear a convincing argument as to how I and my family, not having any symptoms and thus not being infected by the virus, can possibly stop the spread of said virus that we don't have by staying at home or wearing a piece of cloth over our respiratory passages such that we save lives. More recently, it has been decided that the slogans were maybe a bit too highbrow and needed to be simplified further, this time into monosyllables. Hands, face, space. Although I tend to avoid watching Comrade Johnson and Company as they spout this nonsense at the regular stand-ups, on the occasions when I have had that misfortune, it was felt eerily like suddenly being thrust into the world's largest kindergarten, with teacher talking down to his little charges as if they were really, really stupid. I won't sport with your intelligence by mentioning all the other mind-numbing slogans we've been fed this year. Suffice it to say that phrases such as social bubble and COVID secure would be deeply funny were it not for the seriousness of the situation into which those coming up with such tripe have placed us. As an aside, are such buildings for which it is claimed that they are COVID secure also flu secure and cold secure? Good questions. But the infantilicizing of an entire population is by no means the worst thing they have done to us. Worse by far has been the dehumanizing of millions of people, which has been done via a number of enormously destructive methods. Chief of them is the idea that we must all avoid each other. I cannot even begin to think how destructive this has become in a normal society. If you or I have symptoms of a particularly nasty seasonal respiratory illness, which is what COVID-19 is, we would avoid one another. Obviously. But the idea of perfectly healthy people avoiding other perfectly healthy people must qualify as one of the most absurd concepts ever dreamt up. Not only is it self-evidently unnecessary, It is bound to have long-term consequences for the way we view one another, the way we relate to one another, the way we behave around one another. It turns us from seeing one another as humans, made in the image of God, to walking virus carriers and a potential risk. Some people now literally behave as if they are navigating their way through a crowd of potential terrorists, rather than simply walking through a group of fellow humans. People avoidance is not just deeply destructive from a psychological and social perspective, it is also deeply cruel. The idea that a grandparent cannot have contact with their children or grandchildren is just obscene. And the very thought of the elderly being left to fester away in care homes rather than being allowed contact with their families is sick. Yet that's what we've done, or allowed to be done. And of course, I cannot leave off talking about dehumanization without mentioning masks. These wretched things were introduced in the summer, long after the epidemic had waned, at a time when they could not possibly have done any good. Even if they had been capable of doing any good, why were they introduced? Partly to keep the fear narrative going, even though there was extraordinarily little risk of dying of a seasonal respiratory virus at that time of the year. But even more important, they are a sign of submission. They are a "we can do with you what we like" moment. They are nothing to do with health. They are a psychological mask. And even more than the social distancing, they have served to alter the way we see one another and are seen by others. Millions of people humiliated by the marketing team of COVID-19 and their infantile slogans. Millions of people dehumanized by having their faces, their smiles, their laughter, their thoughtfulness, etc. covered to make them into expressionless drones. That was the year we just lived through. Will 2021 be the year a critical mass try to escape the kindergarten and return to being human? Good questions indeed. So yes, lots to consider there. How long? And I talked about this morning as well. A whole show on nothing but COVID crap. Been covering this since January. It's getting old, frankly. But yet here we are, thousands and thousands and thousands of studies later. Some of which we hear, some of which we don't, because obviously there's a narrative in that we have to push. And if it goes against a narrative, well, we'll just blackball you or censor you or digitally erase you as if it never happened. Right? Because they got to maintain a narrative. And what else? Well, we knew that COVID was going to be used as a blocker, if you will, for what was to come via the election. And probably more importantly, ties everything neatly together, the two of them together for the Great Reset. You know, Klaus Schwab has got this grandiose plan for all of us, don't you know? Well, I think they're about to find out we're not going to play too nicely. Alright, let's see. Make sure everything's looking good there, alright. Good on the DLive side, alrighty. Still good over on the YouTube side, alright. Good to see you. Mr. James B, 1973. Motivacio para todos. Things still good down in Brazil, I presume. Good to have you. Alright, so continuing on that theme, the next article, part 3, that has come out the other day, says 2020, the year we sold our liberties for a medical tyranny. And of course this harkens back to the saying of our forefathers, right? Those who would trade a little bit of liberty for temporary safety will get a high degree of neither. And yet here we are. This is a third of the 5 end-of-year articles looking at various aspects of our new COVIDian state in 2020. Parts 1 and 2 here and here. These pieces are also due to be published on the Excellent Conservative Woman website from the 27th through the 31st December, and again also picked up over on Zero Hedge. Says this year has seen what looks like the birth of a new religion. Let us call it Covidianity. Covidianity. It has its prophets, the Neil Fergusons, its priesthood of experts, witty and valiance, its own soteriology, the vaccine of salvation, its evangelists, Piers Morgan, its own eschatology, the new normal, and of course its heretics, anyone questioning the data or the narrative. Not everyone who has adopted the bizarre practices of Covidianity is a Covidian. Many have been cowed into somewhat seeming unwillingly. Many have been bamboozled into it somewhat unwittingly, and many others just do not seem to have thought through what is being done to them, much less whether it is right, necessary, and proportionate. But there are definitely true Covidians, and you can recognize them by their insistence that all bow down to their cult, and that those who refuse should be shamed. In one sense, this religion has come upon us at warp speed. There we all were, going about our business at the start of the year, not particularly suspecting that there would be anything particularly out of the ordinary in 2020, and suddenly, wham! Yet in another sense, many of the ingredients were already in place long before this year, and they were simply brought together in one large melting pot to produce a toxic brew of fear, hysteria, and irrationality on a truly epic scale. Those ingredients include a society that had abandoned belief in the triune God and hadn't quite managed to find a replacement to fill the void. A society obsessed with safetyism and the general sterilization of life. A society glued to the propaganda box in the corner of the room with millions hanging on the every word that proceeds from it as if it were the very oracle of God. And a society that had, by and large, utterly forgotten what freedom actually means. What this has given us is a society seeking an arch first principle to hold everything together. One trying to stave off death by eliminating every potential risk. One that looks unquestioningly to the government, the media, and assembled experts to tell them how to do this. And one that has proved itself willing to give up freedom, won through blood, sweat, and tears centuries ago to achieve it. In short, we have arrived at the planned, technocratic oligarchy that C.S. Lewis warned of us of over half a century ago. And in C.S. Lewis's words, he says the new oligarchy must more and more base its claim to plan us on its claim to knowledge. If we are to be mothered, mother must know best. This means they must increasingly rely on the advice of scientists, till in the end the politicians proper become merely the scientists' puppets. Technocracy is the form to which a planned society must tend. And here's Dwight Eisenhower saying much the same thing in his farewell address in 1961. Yet, in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite. Sound familiar? The irony of all that has happened this year is that in our apparent attempt to eliminate risk, we have given up our lives. That is, we have placed apparent safety so high up on the list of priorities that it has become a god governing how we are to live, breathe, and have our being. And it so dominates our everyday lives that it makes normal life impossible, sucking out joy, meaning, and purpose. It is, as Lewis said, a tragic way to live. Now I care far more how humanity lives and how long. Progress, for me, means increasing goodness and happiness of individual lives. For the species, as for each man, mere longevity seems to be a contemptible ideal. One can understand how people in a plague situation would accept the suspension of normal life for a time, since you don't mess about with an illness that wipes out something like 60% of the population. But for a coronavirus with an infection fatality rate of around 0.2% to 0.26%, for a virus which has caused deaths as a proportion of the population to return to levels not seen since, those dark days of 2000? And yes, I know that COVIDian logicians will claim that the deaths are not higher because we did all that weird stuff like shutting down the country and wearing bizarre face gear and making sure we didn't sing loudly and so on. Then again, COVIDian logic claims lots of things which aren't true. And the fact is, there is no evidence whatsoever to show that these measures had any effect in terms of altering mortality rates. For the illusion of safety, a mess of pottage, we have sold the heritage and the liberties that were bequeathed to us by those who have gone before, which it was our duty to preserve for those who are to come. As Edmund Burke taught us, society is indeed a contract. It is a partnership in all science, a partnership in all art, a partnership in every virtue, and in all perfection. As the ends of such a partnership cannot be obtained in many generations, it becomes a partnership not only between those who are living, but between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are to be born. We have betrayed our ancestors and our descendants, and the idea that we will just get these liberties back is a woeful misunderstanding of how the world works. Firstly, human nature's being what it is, those in power who have developed a taste for authoritarianism rarely like to give it up. And secondly, liberties take centuries of long hard work to grow up, but can be hacked down in a short time, as has happened to us in 2020. Unfortunately, there is no magic formula for reinstating them speedily. Having said that, perhaps there is still time. Perhaps there is still a window of opportunity for us to step back from the brink of this absurd medical tyranny with its false promises of safety, and instead embrace life and freedom. But this would mean rejecting this misery of COVIDianity without any further delay, and taking a good long draught of whatever it was they used to drink in Rohan. Eowyn, I fear neither death nor pain. Aragorn, what do you fear, my lady? Eowyn, a cage, to stay behind bars until use and old age accept them, and all chance of valor has gone beyond recall or desire. And that concludes that article, part 3 of the series that the Blogmire has put together. Again, we'll touch upon it here in the next fireside, probably after the holidays. I would imagine part 4, which just came out here today, as well as part 5 should be available, and we'll hit the last parts of that. All right, well, moving along. So, what do? Mises Institute had a pretty good article here in recent days. Red and blue states, it's time for a multi-state solution. And as you can imagine, what has likely propagated this article was the lawsuit brought by Texas, as well as about 17 other states that hopped on the bandwagon, as well as the legislature of Pennsylvania. Let's see, as well as POTUS. I'm trying to recall all from memory here. Only to make it all the way to the steps of the Supreme Court and get kicked to the curb. And what happened after that was Alan West, former congressman, down in Texas, says, well, maybe it's about time that the states who wish to abide and live under the rule of the Constitution form their own set of states. So, are we at that precipice? Perhaps. Have efforts already been made? Yeah, I can recall listening to Agenda 21 radio a couple times with people like Paul Preston talking about the movements in California. Potential states and that out there, I think potentially called Jefferson or New California. A couple different efforts out there where portions of Oregon and the northern part of California would join together, and other efforts where basically they would carve out the major cities and that in California. And there's been other rubs and that around the country, Texas especially, secession movements, things of that nature. So, red and blue states, it's time for a multi-state solution. James Kettler over at Mises had this to say. Says, far from being a unitive force, powerful, centralized government only serves to pit blocks of the electorate against each other. Division grows in lockstep with the ceaseless expansion of federal power, and the 2020 presidential election was a mere symptom of how heated that division has become. How much worse can it get? That remains to be seen. After Joe Biden's contested presidential win, the country may have to break apart into multiple independent political units if it is to avert further social disintegration. So, power and polarization. To win elections, candidates must pander to the lowest common political denominator. In effect, they must promise to expand wide-reaching projects like Social Security, public health care, economic stimulus, and the military. In fact, candidates are incentivized to out-promise one another, and when in power to follow through on carrying out at least some of those promises in the interest of re-election. The mass democratic structure lubricates this process, as costs are distributed across the entire population, and thus become more or less hidden. That's led to a constant creeping growth in government power, behind which Republican and Democrats almost always form a united front. As Tom Woods says, no matter who you vote for, you always wind up getting John McCain. Within that statist unity, however, exist the seeds of electoral division. Old, widely accepted government programs are used by politicians as a springboard for new, more expansive powers. Consider, for instance, the Green New Deal. It could only have been seriously proposed because the broad-based support the New Deal programs have today. Each new law, regulation, bureau, and program is like a brick on top of which many others can be laid. Government seldom abrogates any of its power, tending instead towards constantly expanding it. That raises the stakes higher and higher with each successive election, with the winning party taking office with more power than ever before. Centrally, as vote seekers, candidates must always work to demonize the opposition and distance themselves from them. To safeguard their own interests, voters must factionalize behind one candidate or the other, often coming to develop a deep politico-cultural affinity with their choice, though they may only be the lesser of two evils. This drives a sharp wedge down the center of the political spectrum, pushing both sides further and further apart. As competing ideologies vie for control of the system, smaller and more amicable politico-cultural disputes thus become the fault lines of national fractionation. Many nuanced opinions are pounded into the ground and replaced, instead, by the Republican-Democrat binary. These two sides look at politics with irreconcilable politico-cultural presuppositions, driving each side, as both fight for control of the same system, to hate the other. Once one party seizes control of the federal apparatus, it tries to solidify support from independents and moderates, while also working to punish its political rivals. From the enlightened liberal principles that originally drove its adoption in the West, democracy has melted and deformed, as it was always inevitably bound to, into an arena of open-faced realpolitik. Both parties seek to win by any means necessary, and the losers must always accept the results of the election, quote-unquote. That is, have the will of the majority imposed upon them. It's a system that neither side can consistently accept, and that both, for the good of the people, must agree to reject. America's division crisis. Nearly 8 in 10 Republican voters agree that this year's presidential election was rigged against President Trump through the perpetration of widespread voter fraud. Biden's quote-unquote win was, as they see it, a fait accompli, predetermined before the first vote was cast. The legitimacy of the past few elections have been widely contested. Moreover, as with, for instance, the Democrats' accusations of Russian interference in 2016. After years of investigations and hearings, at least those accusations were proven false. But this time around, further inquiry into the Republicans' claims of voter fraud have been blocked by the mainstream media and the Washington establishment. With just cause, therefore, Trump loyalists have grasped at every legal recourse they can find in hopes that something will stick. But the bid to overturn the election was, from its inception, a long shot. On January 20th, the 74 million Americans who voted for Trump will be forced under the yoke of a Biden presidency, which will only serve to turn up the heat in the country even more. Nevertheless, Joe Biden has continuously tried to position himself as a moral leader who will unite the nation. In his November 7th victory address, he said, "I will govern as an American president. I'll work as hard for those who didn't vote for me as those who did." Does anyone, though, actually believe that? Biden's politics have differed over the years, but it's clear that his 2020 agenda is by far further to the left than that of any other president in American history. At his side is Kamala Harris, who was rated the most progressive senator in all of Congress last year. How can anyone pretend to imagine that the next administration will be at all unifying? Better yet, how can anyone think any modern presidency will bring America together? Since 2016, the Democratic Party has freely embraced the tenets of socialism and radical progressive politics, while the rise of Trump helped fuel the growth of a new America First nationalist populism in the Republican Party. In just the past 4 years, the two parties have aggressively shifted away from each other and toward their ideological fringes. Moving forward, that split will likely only widen further. On the campaign trail, Biden identified himself as a transition candidate for a deeper, more radical leftism coming down the line. First, the likes of Kamala Harris will take the reins of the country. Then AOC and the Squad, the Constitution-bashing, history-flipping platform of these soon-to-be party leaders, will only exacerbate left-right tensions even further as they deal the coup de grace to America's founding principles. On the conservative side, Trump insiders have already pointed to the possibility of the outgoing president staging a comeback campaign in 2024. And if he doesn't run himself, it'll be one of his children or his closest allies in Congress, perhaps Tom Cotton or Matt Gaetz. The Trump brand looks like it's here to stay in the Republican Party. And if it is, it will continue to focus on carrying out the MAGA agenda. In fact, after 4 years of Biden, the Trump camp may be more energized than ever before. As the national consciousness continues to fork apart all the more diametrically, friends and neighbors will become, in the affairs of state at least, ever more bitter enemies, and the dreams of a united U.S. will fall further out of reach. With that in mind, we must ask, why should America be a single country at all? The states have for years already been working to nullify federal legislation on guns, drugs, healthcare, immigration, the environment, and police militarization. Why hold the states together in a union whose diktats they each want to escape? That steady resistance is unlikely to do anything but grow. Last month, after one of Biden's top COVID policy advisors called for a national lockdown, more than a dozen of Republican governors expressed their refusal to comply. How much more will it take before states decide to just walk away entirely? Secession would give states full sovereignty over their own affairs, so that voters could live under policies more friendly and suitable to their own local and regional interests. There would no longer be a system of national politics through which voters control and domineer other hundreds of miles away. From the very earliest years of the Republic, secession was considered a viable possibility. The United States was not considered a single monolithic blob, as it often is today, but rather a voluntary confederation of free and independent states associated for the preservation of the common good. If the political tides turned and the Union ceased to be beneficial to its constituent parts, each was free to leave it. In 1816, Thomas Jefferson made this clear. If any state in the Union will declare that it prefers separation, I have no hesitation in saying, let us separate. I would rather the states should withdraw, which are for unlimited commerce and war, and confederate with those alone which are for peace and agriculture. Though the public perception of secession has been radically altered since the Civil War, America's founding principles respect the right of every state to leave the Union. At this point, the state's reassertion of that right has been long overdue. Secession is now the only way for the millions of tired and fed-up Americans to protect their interests against federal tyranny. Without it, nothing else can prevent the eventual breakdown of the social order, which is looming in the country's future. Just this past summer, far-left looters clashed violently with right-wing groups and police in city streets across the nation from Portland to Kenosha. Some of the post-election Stop the Steal rallies have themselves led to dangerous confrontations, including stabbings in D.C. and a shooting in Washington state. Indeed, a poll from September revealed that around 20% of voters in general would eagerly support the use of violence against their political opponents. Although the pivotal spark may have not yet arrived, the scaffolding for potential civil disaster is already in place. When the last straw breaks, will America spiral into chaos and insurrection, or will cooler heads agree to peaceful separation? So a secessionist moment The idea of secession is, thankfully, neither alien nor far-fetched to voters. In fact, widespread calls for secession have already been made in response to recent presidential elections. After Obama's re-election, the White House's We the People initiative was inundated by petitions from all 50 states to be granted the right of unilateral secession. When Trump was elected, Democrats in Oregon and California organized serious mass secessionist movements that almost led to both states holding referenda on the topic. With each new election, the political-cultural divide in America grows deeper and a national breakup looks all the more alluring. The impending Biden presidency may be the drop that spills the bucket. A poll from Hofstra University this past September found that 44% of Republican respondents were open to the possibility of seceding if Joe Biden was elected. For millions of Trump voters, self-determination is an essential component to preserving their families, finances, and ways of life. Even Rush Limbaugh, the king of conservative talk radio, recently pondered whether, without secession, right-wing ideals can ever truly win again. If some Republican majority states manage to leave the Union, that might mean lower taxes, fewer regulations, the repeal of gun laws, a new gold standard, school choice, abortion bans, and a more free healthcare market across the board. As independent states, they may discover that Trumpian politics doesn't actually represent them after all, and instead forge paths more in line with their own local traditions. At last, political diversity would be allowed to emerge and flourish in these smaller decentralized states, keeping the government more homegrown and orienting politics more toward the interests of the people. What's more promising is that a few recent murmurings of secession have actually come from GOP lawmakers. After the election, Price Wallace, a state congressman from Mississippi, expressed his interest in secession, followed by Congressman Randy Weber, who succeeded Ron Paul for Texas' 14th congressional district seat. Weber's secessionist endorsement helped generate attention for the Texas nationalist movement, or Texit, including a sudden spike in the group's membership registrations. Weeks later, Texas State Congressman Kyle Biedermann announced that when the Texas House resumes session in January, he'll introduce a bill to allow a popular referendum on the question of secession. Seemingly in support of Biedermann's proposal, the chairman of the Texas Republican Party, Alan West, then commented, "Perhaps law-abiding states should bond together and form a union of states that will abide by the Constitution." Evidently, state legislators are entertaining the notion, many with considerable interest. America may be on the brink of a secessionist moment, and if it is, the time to dismount the surly tiger of big government is now. Like dominoes, the process need only begin with one single state, and many more will surely follow. After everything, that's the only real solution left for America: shaking hands, splitting up, and staying friends from afar. For clearly the country has already split apart in heart, mind, and soul. And at last this internal reality must be reflected in the legal reality. And that was a article penned by James Kettler over on the Mises Institute. Very interesting take on that. But yes, that could be what comes of this. And of course, again, those who have followed any of my work know, after having read through the Federalist Papers many a Saturday night, our forefathers left many instructions, if you will, on how to go about doing that should we find ourselves in a state that we are now. Keep in mind, folks, there's nothing new under the sun. 200 plus years ago, the very same things that we're going through here today were the very same arguments that our founding fathers had to go through for the very same reasons. The only difference is that we have technology today. That's it. We got computers, we got smartphones, information up the wazoo, but at the same time, people are freaking distracted, have the attention span of a fruit fly, and can't seem to see from behind the blinders. So, nonetheless, make mine Texas, Abbott out. Frankly, I'd rather have secession than what we'll have instead. Yep, agreed. Agreed. Alright, continuing on that theme. Zero Hedge had this. The new Confederacy? Yes, it's time for conservatives to unite against the globalist reset. So here we kind of see everything all pulled together. The COVID, the voting systems, the election, if you will, as well as what really lays in store that our central planners would love to implement. And of course, the U.S. being one of the last countries to get out of the way so that they can finish implementing this. Is it still good? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it says we're still going. Alright, looking behind the scenes here, it showed I was offline, but it looks like I'm still alright. Yeah, word of the good. Alright, well, continuing on, again, this by Brandon Smith via Alt Market out of US. It says the narrative could not be more transparent or obvious. But then again, the elites are becoming lazy in their propaganda, and the leftists are not all that bright. Essentially, every time conservatives, or moderates, organize to defend themselves against communist or globalist attack, we are called Nazis, brown shirts, populists, bullies, etc. Now, I'd remind these people that if we were really going the path of the Sturmabteilung, it's a German word, and Sturmabteilung, then there would be rampant intimidation and assault on leftists to the point that they would be afraid to leave their homes or even identify as leftists. Conservatives believe in self-defense, not coercion and terror tactics. Interesting. Such actions are the wheelhouse of the political left these days. They are far better than we are at imitating brown shirt behavior. The reality is that across the board, the only people engaging in widespread censorship and violence are on the political left. Yet we're supposed to be the Nazis. Yeah, right. That's projection 101, right? Historically, there does seem to be a pattern here, though. In Germany in the 1920s and 30s, communist groups were highly active and initiated street violence, riots, and even assassinations. This lured many Germans in fear of being overtaken by a communist regime to support National Socialism, the other side of the coin when it comes to tyranny. In other words, to defeat the communists, the public supported the fascists, and the fascists ended up being just as bad as the communists. If you study the investigations of historians like Anthony Sutton in books like Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, or Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, you will discover there is incredible evidence proving that both the communists and the fascists were funded and managed by these same global elites. In other words, the bankers win either way because they control both sides of the game. I do suspect that a similar strategy is being implemented within the U.S. today, and that part of the agenda of globalists hell-bent on getting their Great Reset is to foment civil war in America, while controlling or manipulating both sides of the fight. It is indeed a catch-22 for conservatives. 1. If we roll over and do nothing, Then the extreme left and their corporate and political partners take control of the country, and we will never see freedom again as they assert their social justice mandates along with their lockdown mandates. And two, if we fight back, using the same tactics as the leftists or support martial law, then we ultimately erase the civil liberties protected within the Bill of Rights. Those rights will never return. Don't believe the promises for a second. And we become history's biggest hypocrites, and a cautionary tale of the dangers of nationalism told to children generations from now, much like the Nazis. There is, however, another option, and it's not diplomacy. The establishment likes to make people think there are only ever two choices during any crisis, and both choices involve giving up more freedom or giving government more power. What they don't want you to consider is the third option, the people taking power for themselves and removing power from those that would abuse it. Yes, I think we had something along those lines, right? We reserve the right to alter or abolish and throw off the government should it become destructive of those ends. I think Q might have told us too. We do have the power, we just haven't exercised it, learned how to use it. Now is the time to do it. Why should we rely on a middleman to enact such measures? Why are we always being told that we need to wait for a president or a government to do the job we can do ourselves? The liberty movement doesn't revolve around Trump or the election, and it should never rely on martial law as a means to secure our safety. We can do this on our own without asking permission or waiting to be led by a mascot. It is true that the political left and conservatives are no longer capable of finding common ground, except, interestingly, among some moderate liberals that also stand against forced vaccinations and medical mandates. In terms of the hard left, their cult is so far beyond reality now that it would be impossible to reconcile. They live on another planet, and their frothing zealotry is too entrenched for them to ever see reason. In their delusional fantasies, we are the ultimate villains, and they are the noble freedom fighters. Of course, every single establishment power platform in the corporate world, in big tech, and in the mainstream media is at their disposal, not to mention millions in funding from globalist organizations like the Open Society Foundation and the Ford Foundation. So this tale of the leftist underdog makes us double over with laughter at times. The majority of conservatives just want to be left alone to live our lives the way we see fit. You know, like real Americans are supposed to do. But this notion is not acceptable to collectivists. They argue that we are all part of a society, their society, and we must abide by their ideologies and rules for the greater good, or suffer the consequences. In other words, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. The fact is, groups in general are abstractions of the mind. Just because someone declares that you are part of their society does not make it so. Walking away is every individual's right as a human being. Groups that survive and thrive tend to be built on shared values and principles. They don't all need to agree on every detail, but they can't be diametrically opposed in every way either. Usually those with principles that match with an inherent sense of conscience are the groups that most appeal to people. That said, there are people in this world, around 1 to 5% of any given population, that do not have inherent conscience, or they suffer from an ingrained affliction called narcissism. These people are attracted to movements that seek to dominate others, and they maintain membership through force rather than appealing to principle. There is no possible way that this group can ever coexist with people that value freedom and empathy, at least not with incredible conflict. There is a large and growing opposition to pandemic lockdown measures, social justice policies that amount to cultural Marxism, as well as the prospect of a Biden presidency, which would encourage both of these travesties exponentially. It's not all about Biden or the leftists, obviously. The reset goes far beyond them, but many conservatives are looking at the problem more according to what is directly in front of them, and less according to the people behind the curtain. In light of this, the mainstream media is doing exactly what it is designed to do: create propaganda to shame anyone that dares to oppose the prevailing establishment narrative. Their most recent strategy is to label the conservative rebellion against the reset as the new Confederacy, and to bring up the specter of the Civil War. This narrative is riding on the back of discussions among conservatives and state politicians that the possibility of secession should be explored in the wake of the growing impasse between leftists, the global agenda, and freedom-loving Americans. The establishment and the useful idiots on the left will have none of it, despite the fact that all they talked about during the first 2 years of Trump's presidency was secession. Now, if the shoe is on the other foot, if Biden enters the White House, and maybe even if he doesn't, the SJWs and their media counterparts are furious at the idea the conservatives might actually succeed where they failed. Collectivists are good at destroying things, not creating things. Their calls for secession are a joke because we all know they are incapable of self-sufficiency, and also they have no means of defense. One look at the short-lived autonomous zones like the Chaz will give you insight to what would happen if leftists tried to separate within the states. It would be a disaster for them. And as I read that, the first thing that comes to mind is that makeshift garden they grew on cardboard. Yeah, that'll feed the whole population of Chaz right there. I guess apparently in their infinite wisdom, plants that you just go get that are already brought up from seed down at the local Home Depot will magically start producing fruit as soon as it's stuck in the dirt. Good for you guys. Bravo. When conservatives talk about separation, though, the leftists and globalists listen. They might not ever admit it, but they know we are actually capable of it. To be clear, what I believe is happening is that the conservatives are being prodded and provoked, not to separate and organize, but to centralize. I think they want to support actions like martial law, which would be considered totalitarian. Conservatives, the only stalwart defenders of civil liberties, using military suppression and abandoning the Bill of Rights to maintain political power. That is a dream come true for the globalists in the long term, and despite people's faith in Trump, there are far too many banking elites and globalists within his cabinet to ensure that such power will not be abused or used against us later. I think the concept of the new Confederacy label being used by leftists and the media reveals what they truly fear, though. If they can get us to roll over for the lockdowns and medical tyranny and a Biden dictatorship, they're happy. If they can get us to support martial law under a Trump coup, they're happy. But what they don't want is for conservatives and moderates to form their own organizational resistance, not beholden to any singular political figure or top-down pyramid structure. Such organization is happening right now. Millions of liberty-minded Americans are leaving leftist counties and states, taking their wealth and businesses with them, and going to more conservative regions where they feel they will be safer. There has not been an ideological immigration like this in the U.S. for well over a century. The reality is the conservatives are congregating, finally, and they are starting to work together for their own security. In my own area in Montana, I have been running local open meetings on preparedness and current levels in and current events in the hopes of getting people on the same page and networked in the event that the current crisis spills over and rule of law breaks down. Or, in the event that there is an attempt by the state or federal government to enforce medical lockdown mandates where we live. These meetings have been expanding in the past couple of months, and needless to say, people in my town are not going to submit to restrictions and do not plan to hide quietly in their homes while their community and businesses are destroyed. These groups are forming across the country, and thank God, because without community organizations, there is zero chance of survival or freedom for liberty-minded Americans. As I've noted in some of my latest articles, the rebellion against lockdowns and vaccination mandates is visible even in hard-left states like California and New York. There is much to be optimistic about. However, the fight is going to be difficult, and there will be ample vitriol leveled against us as we successfully unify. Organization requires a tit-for-tat philosophy to do well, meaning everyone must take some risk in order to encourage others to join the fight. For example, conservatives want business owners to refuse to enforce lockdown rules. But if a business owner makes this courageous choice and faces off with the government health officials, then patriots need to be there to back them up. This might even mean standing in the way of the law enforcement that is violating the constitutional rights of that business. I call this creating a wall of worry. Many police and sheriffs are not on board with the enforcement of illegal mandates, and those that are needed to understand that there are potential consequences for doing so. The wall of worry is a deterrent, and the larger the group of people involved, the better. Police are not going to risk escalation of a fight over lockdown mandates if they realize that fight could go badly for them. And if people in their own departments are against the lockdowns, the consequences double if they seek to enforce them. They should be the ones worried, not us. Health department officials are even less likely to push the issue in the face of opposition. By extension, if your local sheriff's department or police department is standing against the unconstitutional mandates and the state or federal government threatens them with repercussions, you must be there to offer help and support. They are taking a risk for you, so you must be willing to take a risk for them. I am also hearing considerable chatter that many medical professionals, including doctors and nurses, are going to refuse to take the poorly tested and questionable COVID vaccine for fear of damaging side effects. And why should they? Why take a vaccine for a virus that only threatens less than 0.3% of the public outside of nursing homes? Medical professionals are under immense pressure to take the vaccine or lose their license to practice. Conservatives must defend themselves if they rebel against mandatory vaccination. This means helping them to set up their own clinics outside of the controlled system, where they can continue to aid people and still make a living. This means networking liberty-minded patients that need treatments to various ailments to doctors and nurses that will not demand they show a medical passport and will not report them to the government. This means protecting doctors and nurses from retribution should government officials try to punish or arrest them. Communities will need to build their own localized economies, using barter and trade and maybe even creating a local currency scrip, hopefully backed by some sort of commodity. They're going to have to insulate themselves from the lockdowns economically in order to defy the lockdowns in a practical way. Otherwise, anyone that does not conform to medical passports and contact tracing will be denied access to the establishment-controlled economy and die of poverty. We have to create alternatives. We have to offer people a choice outside of tyranny. Otherwise, many will go along with the tyranny. Finally, conservative communities are going to have to provide for their own security. regardless of how the election situation actually ends, and even if Trump stays in the White House and refuses to concede, martial law is an unacceptable scenario. Conservatives don't need it anyway. We should be establishing localized security, otherwise known as militias, composed of any able-bodied person in the community that wants to join. These militias would have to form as unofficial organizations, as it is unlikely that state politicians will sanction them. That's okay. We don't need them to sanction our own security and defense. Like I said, we can handle it ourselves. In the meantime, the leftists will label us brown shirts, but as mentioned, they are the people that have proven over and over again to be violent and totalitarian. So their accusations ring hollow. The media will call us the New Confederacy, which is funny, because a majority of the original Confederates and slave owners during the Civil War were Democrats. We'll set aside that irony and point out that people have an inherent right to self-defense and to freedom from oppression, and none of us are slave owners. Anyone that calls for the globalist reset is an enemy of individual rights, and anyone that tries to enforce medical tyranny is on the wrong side of history and of morality. They can call us whatever they want and make erroneous historical comparisons until they are blue in the face. It won't change the fact that we're seeking to be free and they are seeking to take that freedom away. This is all that matters. So there you go. Something to consider. Building communities. Standing up for those who take a stand against the lockdowns, the tyranny, the businesses that are being shut down. We've seen pockets of that around the country. From gyms out in New Jersey being fined $16,000 a day, fines totaling up to $1.2 million and growing. Find him, tell him to piss off. Try to take you to court. Show me the law. Show me the law. Not going to happen. Same thing for business owners, restaurants, and that out in California, while at the same time in the parking lot next door they're able to have congregations. Right. That's what we got to do. We got to provide security for these folks to keep those businesses open. Those who go against this, and basically what it's going to entail is an underground economy. Whether they like it or not. It's going to be all part of the decentralization that's going to take place. Are you guys prepared? And last but not least, we'll close on this. Out of Natural News says, fight now or be a slave. President Trump should declare insurrection and impose martial law until we can investigate and hold traitors accountable, then have new election. Well, that goes completely against the grain of the article I just covered. Whoops. But hey, we'll read it anyway. Lots of opinions here. Article by L. Todd Wood, republished from the creativedestructionmedia.com. Hillary Clinton was so surprised. But we had dominion, she thought. I was going to be president. Doesn't it all make so much sense now? Obama was brought in to begin the work of destroying America. Hillary was to finish the job. But then came Trump, and the Chinese-funded resistance began. And oh, what a resistance it has been. The corporate media, DOJ, FBI, parts of DOD, Silicon Valley, all have been involved all the way through the election. Much of our federal government is compromised. As our investigative reporter George Eliason so artfully said, their hands are caught in Fang Fang's cookie jar. There is a simple truth all patriotic Americans must face. We fight now, or we will live as slaves to the Chinese Communist Party. Never in my life did I think I would ever write those words, but I just did. It's not a cliche. Every veteran alive today swore an oath to defend the Constitution against domestic enemies. They are in our midst, among us, destroying our republic. It is up to our generation now. We cannot accept this quote-unquote election. This is a blatant lie. They are coming for your guns next. They will systematically put us in camps, those willing to fight for freedom, that is. China has much experience doing this. If we don't fight now, we will live as slaves. There will not be another day. The fight is now. The conspiracy theorists were right all along. Hold the line. Go to a rally. Get in your state legislators' face. Make them have a backbone. They are scared, little traitorous children. Organize a group of patriots for communication purposes. Resist these diabolical lockdowns meant to enslave your family. Buy a gun, or 2, or 3, while you still can. Prepare for the worst, and fight like hell. It's here, folks. We must face reality. Expect to be demonized. Expect to be persecuted. Expect to be targeted. But fight anyway. President Trump must invoke the Insurrection Act and declare the election illegal. We must investigate and hold the traitors accountable. Then we can hold a new election. President Trump was born for this moment. He does not want to go down in history as the man who lost America to communists. There will be those who choose to cooperate with the Chi-Coms in exchange for luxury and safety, just as the Tories did of old in 1774. I choose to fight for freedom. There are millions like me. Patriots rise. So that's the rally cry, right? For the evening. Are you prepared? Are you ready to fight like hell? This is the time. Right? Or should we go back to the fireside chat that I just had previous this one and remind us of how comfortable perhaps we have gotten up to this point? Right? All of us are going to be living a little bit outside of our comfort zones for the next little while. Better get used to it. Better ante up. Pull up the bootstraps. And get ready to fight like hell in every way, shape, and fashion that you can. And it isn't just here stateside, folks. The encroachment is worldwide. I see the crap going on in the UK today. It's sickening. The fact that they detain folks off planes and hold them in basically the equivalent of a holding cell in German airports while all this new strain COVID bullshit takes place. Is there more to the story here? What are they using? The same frickin' PCR test that's 90% ineffective and gives false positives? Please. We see right through this shit. Done with it. So be ready, folks. We're in for some very interesting times. Very, very interesting times. Not just around this election, but as a whole. And I think we're about to see the great reveal take place. I think Sidney Powell had a great meme the other day. We don't have R versus D. And yes, to some degree, this is very much good versus evil. But I think what we're about to witness here by about January 6th is who are the traitors versus who the patriots are. Keep tabs, folks. This is for all the marbles. Alright, folks, that is going to do it for this evening's Fireside. We'll be back here a little bit later on today now, as we are now into the 23rd. We'll have the Wednesday lineup at our usual time here. So tune back into the channel then. We'll have a lot more to say. And we'll see you back then. Take care, everybody. God bless.